The journalist Stephen Clarke, who in his books helps us understand the English here in France and vice versa. Actually, the latest one is called Elizabeth II, Queen of Laughs. Thank you for being with us. First of all, your reaction to the latest developments: election, no election, caretaker prime minister.
Well, it's a bit scary. If you're British, it's a bit scary because having a prime minister saying he doesn't agree with the law is a bit scary. You know, he doesn't agree with the decision of 11 Supreme Court judges. And then to have his Attorney General, who is basically the Minister of Law, the legal advisor, saying that Parliament is a dead Parliament. It's this, you know, populism is coming right to the surface now, and it's encouraging people to disrespect the law. I mean, for me as a Brit, I've never ever seen this before. It feels really dangerous.
It feels really dangerous, yet we saw that surprised people on both sides of this argument, that this ruling from the Supreme Court was unanimous.
Yeah, that means that all the country's top judges said that basically Boris Johnson had lied to the Queen. You know, it's blasphemy. You can't lie to the Queen. Who lies to the Queen? You know, this old lady. Who lies to her? You can't lie to the Queen. And you know, they've basically just pointed out the law to the Prime Minister, who says he doesn't agree with it. I mean, you can't do that as a Prime Minister. You're there to uphold the law. You're there to represent an elected, you know, you've been elected by law. You know, what other laws does he not agree with? Does he not agree with, you know, drunk driving or something? You know, it's ridiculous.
We heard Jeremy Corbyn in an interview with the BBC this Wednesday saying that Boris Johnson should apologize to the Queen. Now, Corbyn, who himself is known for his more Republican penchant, what was your reaction to hearing that?
That is the big problem with this Parliament, is that there's no opposition. Labour, no one knows really what Labour thinks about Brexit. They're saying that they don't want a general election until Boris Johnson has stopped a no-deal Brexit, but they've just had their conference and it's not sure what they think about Brexit in Labour. So basically, the Labour Party, the main opposition party, is being completely sort of empty as well. They're not putting forward any positive ideas. So it's horrible to say it, but in a way, the Attorney General is almost right. It's not a dead Parliament, it's a sleeping Parliament. They're not really doing anything. And that's what is turning people against them, which is a really dangerous thing. When you start turning against your Parliament, you start having people say, I don't respect Parliament, I don't respect law. You're kind of, I mean, we don't want a French Revolution.
Well, hang on. There is this so-called rebel alliance. There have been meetings between the leaders of the Labour Party, the Scottish National Party, the Liberal Democrats, and more. And they're trying to come up with some kind of a solution because they all agree on one thing. They don't want to dissolve Parliament now and then have a no-deal Brexit happen de jure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they don't want a no-deal Brexit because we've all read this terrible yellow hammer document which points out that there will be medical shortages. I read it today and I saw that the government is not even sure if there's a no-deal Brexit. They're not even sure they will have the chemicals necessary to purify the water supply. I mean, no deal is a total, utter disaster. So yeah, most people in Parliament currently are against no deal.
But wait, you talked about a sleeping Parliament, but do you get the sense that the opposition is at work and that they may come up with some kind of a solution where they can have some kind of a national unity government of sorts? They've even talked about having the doyen of Parliament, Ken Clarke, who's a conservative, be sort of a caretaker prime minister while they just make sure they get over this Brexit deadline, the October 31st date.
Yeah, well, it's quite simple for Parliament to say things like that. The trouble is no one's saying what is going to happen, because now it's sort of people are talking as if Brexit, a sort of almost catastrophic Brexit, is a fait accompli. It's almost they've taken the economy, the country, to the edge of the cliff. And now what they're saying is, should we jump in at high tide or low tide? We're going to jump over the cliff, but when? And this is the problem that worries people like me who've been, you know, living abroad. I've been seeing lots of friends who've got sort of businesses and things, doing things completely openly across Britain, you know, Europe, Ireland, everything's completely open and free, and Britain depends on that. And now they're talking as if that's going to end sometime, somehow, but we're not sure when. We've taken a massive step towards Brexit, and Labour, the opposition, the main opposition, because let's face it, if there was an election, it would basically be between Labour and Conservatives. The Lib Dems don't have that much power. Basically, it seems as if all of these are in favour of some kind of Brexit. So there's
Labour's official stance that it took at its conference in Brighton is we will flesh out a deal with the EU, and then we'll have a referendum to decide whether or not you want to approve it.
They change that all the time, and most people suspect that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't really agree with that. So we don't know, that's the trouble these days, is these politicians, very few of them are speaking what they really feel. They're just thinking about, will I get re-elected? And it's only people like Ken Clarke and a few others, the few MPs, the 20-odd MPs who left the Conservative Party, who just stood up and said, look, enough is enough, we've got to do something different now. But the very few of them are actually raising their voices to try and push the country in some sort of positive direction. Because, France at the moment is debating things like the ethical medical treatment that's possible. Britain is debating nothing except what the hell are we going to do? That's the problem. There just seems to be no true debate about the future of the country. It's just, it's going to be horrible, but how horrible?
All right, let's take the long view, because you're someone who writes history books. Mm-hmm. Boris Johnson, he's lost, something like 6 votes, and then if you count on
he's lost every single vote.
Every single vote since he became Prime Minister, plus this landmark Supreme Court ruling, which will go down in the history books perhaps for centuries. And yet, his political futures, he's still the Prime Minister, and if there's a general election, he could become the Prime Minister again. What does that tell you?
What it tells us is that populism is winning. The sort of whole social media control of news is winning. So that people like me, including me, we only listen to people we agree with. There's no one in the middle. Very few people listen to journalists or editors or the word expert and scientist. Words like that in Britain and the UK are being devalued. So people don't listen to real arguments, real economic arguments. They just listen to what they want to hear. And Brexiters want to leave. They don't care what happens. They just want to leave. Remainers want to stay. And there's no real debate anymore. I've never, all the time I've been in England, France, I was in Britain when Margaret Thatcher was there, and we thought the country was divided then, but it's never been like this now. The country is just split in two, and there's no real debate between the two. I've never, ever seen that before.
Worse than under Thatcher.
Much worse than under Thatcher, because under Thatcher there was a kind of solidarity amongst people. They didn't want the mines to close. They saw what damage she was doing to the economy, and there was even people who liked her as a Conservative thought that something better ought to happen. There was a feeling of sort of mass solidarity, and there was a debate. Now there is no debate. There is no discussion between pro and anti-Brexit people and between parliamentarians. There's almost an end to parliamentary debate. As we've seen today, they just shout at each other, and no one listens. And that seems to me, sort of taking it historically, very dangerous. And every day I almost feel like we're in the middle of the French Revolution. When are they going to get the guillotine out? And just Boris Johnson doesn't like what some of his MPs are saying. He throws them out of the party, including the grandson of Winston Churchill. He's been thrown out of the Conservative Party.
Aren't these exaggerated, though, these constant comparisons to the period of Oliver Cromwell in the 17th century?
Well, we hope they are. But, today, the Attorney General actually quoted Oliver Cromwell in his speech when he was talking about a dead Parliament. He quoted Oliver Cromwell. I mean, he's the one that's doing this.
One final question. Again, I go back to the Queen here for a second, because, again, you've just written a book about her. Mm-hmm. There was, when Boris Johnson decided on prorogation, there were these calls for the Queen, who's been in power since the 1950s, to this time get off the fence and get involved in politics. She didn't do so.
She's not allowed to do so.
She's not.
You say she's been in power. She hasn't been in power. She's been present as a monarch. And that's the British monarchy. That's why the British monarchy has lasted so long, because she actually has no power. When people say Boris Johnson went
we just learned through David Cameron's book that he asked her to raise an eyebrow in favour of staying...
she wore a hat. Do you remember when she opened Parliament and she was wearing a blue hat with little yellow flowers on it, but she's not allowed to even to raise an eyebrow. She's not allowed to say anything. And when Boris Johnson went to her and said he wanted to prorogue Parliament, close Parliament, and he asked her permission, he didn't really ask for her permission. She only ever does what the Prime Minister says. So she just said she had to say yes. She has no real power at all. I think she's probably not laughing now. I think she's pretty sad at what's going on now, because the Queen, having seen now 14 different prime ministers, she's very rarely had a government like this which completely disrespects the truth.
One final question on this matter. Spoiler alert, you're not the first journalist ever to interview the Queen. It hasn't happened yet, but I don't know, maybe you put your request in. Do you get the sense after researching this book where she stands on this issue?
I think actually, when I wrote to the Queen asking her what her favourite joke was, and she didn't reply, I think she's got too many. But anyway, I think I get the sense that the Queen, who travels her whole life, or used to, she travels a bit less now. She believes really strongly in the Commonwealth, which is a kind of non-European Union, and she actually opened the tunnel, the tunnel, and she said that she made a nice joke in French about how she didn't believe that the channel was a barrier between us. She said it was a trait d'union, which is like a hyphen between us, and I think the Queen is very international and European, and she probably thinks it's stupid for her Parliament, to have spent 3 whole years talking basically about nothing. I think she's never seen that before.
Right, certainly with Stephen Clarke fails. Then thanks for being with us. Stephen Clarke, his latest book, Elizabeth II, Queen of Laughs. Thank you for being with us. We'll have more coverage as we wait on Boris Johnson's speech later before the Commons. Stay with us. More news to come, plus the day's business and sports.